In my 35 years on the bench in Providence, I thought I had seen every kind of excuse, every kind of lie, every kind of heartbreak a person could carry into a courtroom. But the morning a real estate mogul in a silk tie smiled at me and quietly offered me a luxury condo in exchange for mercy, even I had to pause and ask myself what kind of test had just walked through my door. My name is Judge Anthony Carbone, and what happened that day reminded me why justice cannot be bought. If this kind of story means something to you, my friends, leave a comment and stay with me, because this one did not end the way anyone expected. It was a gray Providence morning, the kind that makes the sidewalks shine and the old brick buildings look like they are, holding on to 100 years of secrets. I came into the courthouse early, the way I always did, with coffee in one hand and the memory of my father in the other. My father came to this country with almost nothing. He taught me that a man's name should be worth more than his wallet, and that if you ever get a seat of responsibility, you sit in it for the people who never had a chance to sit anywhere at all. That was the philosophy I carried onto the bench every single day. I tried to treat people the way I would want my own family treated if they stood nervous and embarrassed before a judge, not with softness for the sake of appearances, not with a hard heart for the sake of power, but with dignity. Always dignity. If you believe dignity matters more than status, hit that like button, because what happened next is the kind of thing that tells you exactly who people are when they think the rules are beneath them. Inspector Doyle Quinn was already there, straightening a stack of files and giving me the kind of look he usually saved for mornings when trouble had arrived before I had. I knew that look. I had relied on that man's instincts for years. He didn't waste words, and he didn't need to. One raised eyebrow from Quinn could tell me more than a whole page of legal arguments. "Big calendar today, Judge," he said. "They're all big to the people in the chairs," I told him. He gave me a half smile. "One of them's bigger than most." I sat down, adjusted my glasses, and glanced through the docket. Parking violations, vehicle code matters, unregistered commercial trucks, blocking a handicap access lane, improper use of a no-standing zone. On paper, it looked like ordinary municipal business. But there was a name attached to a cluster of citations that stood out because everyone in Rhode Island knew it. Victor Bellecourt, developer, builder of gleaming towers, buyer of politicians if you listen to the whispers. The kind of man whose name wound up on hospital wings and charity banners in giant gold letters. I had learned long ago that fame and wealth are costumes people wear into court, and court has a funny way of asking them to take those costumes off. When I looked at his file, I saw 11 citations tied to vehicles registered through 3 different shell companies, all linked to a waterfront condo project called Harbor Crown Residences, luxury units, rooftop pool, concierge service, advertising that promised a view above ordinary life. I've been doing this for 35 years, and let me tell you something, my friends. Whenever a lawyer works that hard to hide a simple parking ticket behind 3 corporations, it usually means the parking ticket isn't the real story. The morning began the way many mornings do. A delivery driver with tears in his eyes because his registration lapsed after his wife's surgery. A young mother who parked too close to a hydrant while carrying a feverish child into an urgent care clinic. An elderly man who kept saying he did not understand the sign because the snow had covered it. I listened. I asked questions. I tried to find the person underneath the paperwork. Then a woman named Teresa Mendez came before me, and without knowing it, she set the tone for everything that followed. She was maybe 70, maybe older, with a coat that had been mended more than once, and hands that trembled even when they were still. Her citation involved a resident-only lot on Willow Street, near the very same Harbor Crown project tied to Victor Bellecourt's companies. She had parked there for 22 minutes while bringing groceries and an oxygen tank upstairs to her husband, who had end-stage lung disease. Her car had been ticketed and nearly towed. I looked at the photograph attached to the citation. There it was, a faded sedan parked crooked because someone had rushed. In the back seat, plain as day, were grocery bags and a small portable oxygen unit. The timestamp matched the hospital discharge papers she had carefully folded in her purse. When I asked to see the paperwork, my heart sank. The discharge had happened that very morning. She was not making up a story. She was carrying a life. She looked at me with the shame I have seen on too many good people. "I know I was wrong, Your Honor," she said quietly. "I just didn't think the machine outside would care." I leaned forward. "The machine doesn't care," I told her. "That's why God made judges." The room laughed softly and the tension broke. I dismissed her fine, not because the law meant nothing, but because the full truth mattered. Context mattered. Humanity mattered. And as she walked away wiping her eyes, I happened to look at the next file in the stack again. Same block, same development, same private security complaint attached to city citations, same project, Harbor Crown. That was when I realized Teresa Mendez was not a random old woman with bad luck. She was a clue. If this touches your heart, leave a comment, because I want you to remember her name, Teresa Mendez. Sometimes the smallest case in a courtroom opened the largest door. A few cases later, the courtroom doors opened and Victor Bellecourt walked in like he was arriving at a gala instead of a municipal hearing. He had that polished confidence some men mistake for character. Tailored navy suit, silver watch, hair perfect, smile measured to the millimeter. His lawyer walked half a step behind him carrying a leather folder, and two assistants hovered near the back, one of them holding what looked like glossy marketing brochures. The room noticed. Wealth changes the air when it enters a public place. People look up, shoulders shift, even the silence gets curious. But I have seen millionaires and men with holes in their shoes, and I can tell you this: fear sounds the same in every bank account. Arrogance does too. He stepped forward when his name was called. "Good morning, Judge," he said, warm as butter. "Good morning," I said. He smiled wider. "It's an honor. My mother adores judges like you." "Then let's not disappoint your mother." There was a little laughter. He expected me to be charmed. I could see that immediately. Some people walk into a courtroom thinking charisma is a coupon. What am I going to do with you people, I thought. You can build towers, but you still don't understand that the law has no penthouse floor. I began with the facts. These vehicles were cited on 11 separate occasions for blocking handicap access, standing in restricted loading areas, and obstructing emergency lanes near your Harbor Crown site. Do you contest ownership? His lawyer answered first, of course. The ownership structure is somewhat layered, Your Honor. Layered, I repeated. It's a parking ticket, Counselor, not lasagna. The courtroom laughed again, including Quinn, who lowered his head to hide it. Victor Bellecourt smiled politely, but I saw a flash in his eyes. Powerful men don't mind humor until it lands on them. His lawyer pivoted. The issue, Your Honor, is operational confusion during a complicated construction process. We are prepared to resolve this matter efficiently. I have heard that word resolve from people who wanted problems to disappear without consequences. Efficiently often means without looking too closely. So I looked more closely. I examined the photo packet. One truck parked across the striped space reserved for wheelchair access. Another van blocking the curb cut outside an older apartment building adjacent to the development. A third vehicle idling in a fire lane. Dates spread over 3 months. Not one mistake, a pattern. When I looked up, Victor Bellecourt was still smiling. That bothered me more than if he had been angry. "Let me ask you something," I said. "How many notices did your companies receive before somebody in authority decided to come to court personally?" He chuckled softly. "Judge, I like to handle things myself." That line would have sounded impressive anywhere else. In a courtroom it sounded revealing, because men who handle things themselves often mean they are used to handling them in rooms where nobody says no. Before I could ask my next question, one of his assistants approached the rail and placed a cream-colored envelope on the clerk's desk. It was thick, too thick for documents, too polished for ordinary business. My clerk looked at me, Quinn looked at the assistant, the lawyer looked at the floor, and Victor Bellecourt very calmly said, "Just some information for the court, a small token of admiration. Nothing improper." I didn't touch it right away. I just looked at it. The room got very still. In 35 years on the bench, I had seen envelopes that contained receipts, photos, apology letters, unpaid bills, birth certificates, memorial cards, and once a child's drawing of a judge with superhero arms. But I had never seen a man in an open courtroom try to package influence in linen paper and call it respect. I looked at him and said, "A token of admiration?" He nodded. "My company has a charitable housing initiative. One of our units is often made available for civic figures, community stewards, short-term retreats. You do important work. We thought perhaps when you retire a quiet place by water would be a fitting gesture." For a moment the words just hung there, almost too absurd to land. A condo. He was offering me a condo the way some people bring a box of pastries. Not directly enough to sound like a mob movie. Smooth enough to give himself a layer of deniability, but not so subtle that anyone in the room missed what he was doing. My throat tightened, not from fear but from insult. Not because he thought I might say yes, but because he thought this bench was the kind of place where the right offer, presented with the right smile, could change what was true. Quinn took one step forward. The prosecutor straightened in his chair. I raised my hand gently. "Nobody move." Then I said something I'd never planned to say in my life. "Clerk, mark that envelope as Court Exhibit A." The courtroom gasped. Victor Bellecourt's smile finally slipped. "If you're still with me, subscribe to hear more stories like this," because that was the exact moment The morning stopped being about parking tickets and started becoming a lesson nobody in that room would ever forget. His lawyer found his voice before Bellecourt did. Your Honor, I think there has been a misunderstanding. There may have been, I said. Let's clear it up in public. I opened the envelope carefully like a man opening a snake basket. Inside was a glossy presentation folder embossed with the Harbor Crown logo. There were photos of a waterfront unit, 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble counters. There was a typed letter congratulating me on a lifetime of service to civic compassion. And clipped inside, folded once, was a reservation form holding Unit 18B off-market, pending acceptance by distinguished recipient. I held it up between 2 fingers. Counselor, which part of this would you like me to misunderstand? Bellecourt stepped in quickly now, hands out, trying to regain control. Judge, with all due respect, this has nothing to do with today's hearing. It's recognition. People honor public servants all the time, not while asking for relief on 11 violations tied to their business. It wasn't conditioned on anything. Conditioning, I said, is something juries infer from context. And the context, sir, is standing right in front of me, wearing a $4,000 suit. He flushed. The gallery leaned forward. You could feel the electricity. But I have learned that the biggest mistake a judge can make is turning outrage into theater. So I slowed myself down. Anger can be satisfying for a second, but wisdom lasts longer. I reminded myself that my duty was not to perform disgust. My duty was to protect the process. I asked the prosecutor to approach. I asked the clerk to preserve the exhibit. I asked Inspector Quinn to note the names of every person who had handled the envelope. Bellecourt looked offended now, as if being treated seriously was somehow unfair. Judge, he said, voice clipped, you're making this look criminal. I looked at him for a long moment. No, sir, you did that all by yourself. One of the women in the gallery covered her mouth. Quinn's expression did not change, but I could tell he felt it. The prosecutor gave the slightest nod. There are moments in court when everyone present realizes they are watching more than procedure. They are watching a line being drawn. I could have ended the hearing right there. I could have referred the matter out and continued the parking cases to another date. That would have been the cleanest legal route. But something in me said no, because underneath this envelope, underneath the ego, underneath the polished lie, there were still 11 citations, 3 shell companies, an elderly woman with an oxygen tank, and a pattern that smelled like contempt for ordinary people. If I stopped too soon, the deeper truth might stay buried. So I said, we are going to proceed carefully. The possible impropriety of this communication will be referred to the proper authorities, but the underlying citations remain before this court, and I intend to understand the full record. Bellecourt's lawyer objected. I overruled him. Then I started asking questions the way I always do when I suspect paper is hiding something flesh and blood would reveal. Who controlled parking operations at Harbor Crown? Site managers, the lawyer said. Names. He gave 2. Who instructed private security to report adjacent residents? Security handled its own enforcement. Really? I said. Then why is your company copied on every complaint? No answer. I picked up Teresa Mendez's file from the earlier stack and held it next to Bellecourt's citations. Do you know this woman? He glanced at the name and shrugged. No. She knows you, I said. Not personally, but she knows the consequences of your project. His lawyer tried to steer us back. Your Honor, with respect, individual neighborhood frustrations are not relevant to these municipal violations. That depends, I said. If your vehicles repeatedly obstructed access in front of occupied residences while your company was pressuring that block into redevelopment, I would say relevance has arrived and taken a seat, the gallery murmured. Bellecourt shifted for the first time, not much, just enough for me to know I had found the place where his confidence lived on weaker ground. Let me tell you something, my friends. I have been doing this for 35 years, and sometimes the truth doesn't come out when you push. It comes out when you hold silence long enough that the guilty start trying to fill it. That is exactly what happened. Bellecourt spoke too quickly. We've had disputes with holdout tenants, sure, but nothing improper. The word holdout caught my attention immediately. Not residents, not families, not elderly people trying to remain in the homes they had lived in for decades. Holdouts, a business word, a demolition word, a word that reduces human beings to obstacles. Holdout tenants, I repeated. Is that what you call them? He realized too late how it sounded. I only mean there were delays. Delays to what? Our transition schedule. And the handicap spaces your trucks blocked, I asked, were those part of the transition too? No answer. The prosecutor asked permission to add something to the record. He produced a folder the city had not initially linked to the tickets because different departments had filed reports separately. Complaints from residents on Willow Street and Grafton Lane, photographs, incident notes. One report described an ambulance unable to pull tight to the curb because contractor vehicles occupied the marked zone. Another described an older resident forced to walk half a block with a walker after her medical transport could not access the building entrance. When I saw those reports, I felt something heavy settle in my chest. This was no longer about a rich man trying to buy leniency on a cluster of petty violations. This was about a pattern of indifference. And indifference, my friends, can hurt people every bit as much as malice. I lifted one photograph. In it, a white cargo van with one of Bellecourt's subcontractor tags sat across a blue-striped access area. Just behind it, partly visible, was a woman with a walker standing in the cold. She looked small, forgotten, like the city had built something new and simply pushed her to the edge of the picture. I said quietly, "The law is not a velvet rope for the privileged. It is a door the public is supposed to be able to reach." Nobody laughed at that one. Bellecourt's lawyer asked for a recess. I denied it. Bellecourt asked to speak privately. I denied that too. In this room, I chashi and me and two frodon dandy. If it can't be said aloud, it probably shouldn't be said at all. That line traveled through the courtroom in silence. People felt it. I felt it. Sometimes a sentence comes out of you and you realize it carries every lesson your parents tried to teach you in a kitchen with one working light bulb and bills on the table. If you know someone who still believes integrity matters, share this story with them, because this next part showed me something about power I will never forget. Just when I thought Bellecourt was cornered, the back doors opened again, and a woman in a camel-colored coat stepped in slowly with a cane. Not flashy, not styled, not there to impress anybody. She had white hair pulled back neatly, and she carried herself with the quiet determination of someone who had spent her whole life enduring things without making a show of it. Quinn leaned toward the clerk, said something, and the clerk whispered to me her name. Elena Bellecourt, Victor's mother. Now, I did not know then whether she had come on purpose or by coincidence, but I noticed something immediately. Victor Bellecourt, who had been so polished and controlled all morning, went still in a completely different way when he saw her. Not angry, not embarrassed exactly, more like a schoolboy who had just realized his report card was being read aloud by the one person whose opinion he could never fully outrun. She took a seat in the gallery. She did not wave, she did not smile, she just sat. I looked at Victor. "Would you like your mother to stay?" His jaw tightened. "That's not necessary." I turned to her. "Ma'am, this is a public courtroom. You are welcome here." She nodded once. I could see Bellecourt swallowing frustration, and I will tell you something from the bench. A person's truest education often appears on their face the moment a parent enters the room. We continued. I called for the site manager named in the reports, a man named Dennis Harlow, who had been sitting near the back trying to look invisible. He came forward reluctantly. When I asked him who instructed security to report neighborhood vehicles aggressively and leave contractor vehicles alone, he glanced at Bellecourt before answering. That glance said more than any testimony. "Mr. Harlow," I said, "please understand you are already under oath." He wiped his forehead. "We were told to keep pressure on the block, make it inconvenient. Not illegal, just inconvenient." The whole room reacted. "By whom?" He hesitated. "By whom?" He looked at Bellecourt again. "Executive management." That is the sort of answer middlemen give when they want to survive the truth without fully touching it. But it was enough to crack the shell. What did inconvenient mean, I asked. He exhaled hard. "Strict reporting, fast towing, no accommodations, no unofficial grace, especially for the older building residents. We were trying to encourage turnover. There it was again. That polished language people use when they want human suffering to sound like a scheduling issue. My stomach turned. I looked toward Elena Bellecourt in the gallery. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. She did not appear shocked. That somehow hurt more. Then came the detail that changed the whole moral temperature of the case. The prosecutor handed me one final complaint note. It involved an evening in February when a resident named Sofia Alvarez parked temporarily in a restricted section while rushing her 8-year-old son, who was in respiratory distress, from a rideshare to the building elevator. Security called for enforcement anyway. She got ticketed. By the time she came downstairs later, her car had been booted. She had to borrow money for the release. I read the note twice because I wanted to be certain. Then I asked, "Is Ms. Alvarez here?" A woman near the aisle raised her hand. She had 2 children with her, dressed neatly, sitting too still, the way children do when they know adults are trying very hard not to fall apart. She came forward with a folder pressed to her chest. When I asked to see the medical bills, my heart sank all over again. Emergency asthma treatment, prescription costs, a printed balance past due, school absences. She spoke softly, almost apologizing for existing in the way some frightened people do when they have been told by life too many times that inconvenience belongs only to the rich and consequences belong to everyone else. "I wasn't asking for special treatment," she said. "I just needed 5 minutes." I looked at Bellecourt. "Did your company want her 5 minutes too?" He said nothing. Sophia's son tugged her sleeve and whispered something. She bent down, kissed his forehead, and stood straighter. That little gesture got me right in the chest. It reminded me of my mother, who could be exhausted to the bone and still make a child feel the room was safe. I said to the boy, "How are you doing now, young man?" He nodded. "Better." "Good," I said. "Stay that way." Then I looked back at the defendant and thought about all the men I had seen over the years who could calculate square footage faster than sorrow, men who could see profit instantly and humanity only after being forced to stand close enough to smell it. I did not hate them. Hate is easy and usually useless, but I could not permit them to turn my courtroom into one more office where outcomes leaned toward money. "Mercy is not for sale," I said quietly, "and neither is this bench." That sentence settled over the courtroom like prayer. If this story is moving you, leave a comment and tell me whether you think people with power should be judged more strictly or exactly the same, because the answer says a lot about what kind of society we want to live in. Victor Bellecourt finally asked to speak without his lawyer. I allowed it, which made his counsel look like a man watching his umbrella blow away in a storm. Bellecourt stepped closer to the rail. For the first time, his voice lost its silk. "Judge, I never meant disrespect. I admire what you do. I held up my hand. Let me ask you something. When did admiration begin arriving with property transfer forms?" He lowered his eyes. That mattered. Some people can fake remorse from the neck up, but the eyes tell the truth about whether the soul has entered the room. "I made a mistake," he said. "You made several," I replied. "The condo was only the most expensive one." He nodded faintly. "Tell me the truth now. Did you think I could be influenced?" A long pause. "Yes," he said. "Nurse." There it was. Not a legal argument, not a public relations phrase, a confession of mindset, not necessarily to a criminal act in the formal sense, but to the moral one that made all the rest possible. He thought the system could be tilted if he found the right pressure point. He believed a judge was like a city board member, a lobbyist, a donor liaison, a room somewhere behind a nicer door. He thought everything had a number. My father used to say, "The day you think everyone has a price is the day you discover your own." I heard that sentence in my head so clearly I almost turned to see if he had whispered it behind me. I asked Bellecourt about his mother. "Did she know you brought this envelope?" His face changed instantly. "No." "Would she have approved?" He did not answer. I looked toward Elena Bellecourt. "Ma'am, you don't have to say anything, but if you wish to speak, I'll hear you." She rose slowly and came forward with the careful steps of someone who understood dignity is not volume. When she stood at the rail, she looked not at me first, but at her son. I will never forget that look. It was not rage, it was grief. The grief of a parent realized in success had not made a child bigger, only harder. "I cleaned rooms in a motel for 27 years, she said. "His father laid tile until his knees gave out. We wanted him to have more. Not this kind of more. Nobody in that courtroom moved." She went on. "I told him when he bought his first building, if you ever forget what it feels like to carry your groceries up 3 flights in the rain, you are already poorer than the people who rent from you." Victor Bellecourt stared at the floor. I felt my own throat tighten. because this reminded me of my father, my mother, every immigrant kitchen table where parents break themselves in half so their children can stand taller, only to pray those children never confuse height with worth. Elena turned to me. "Judge, I'm sorry for what he did here," I said gently. "You are not on trial, ma'am." "No," she said without taking her eyes off her son, "but my raising is." That line broke the room. I saw people in the gallery wiping their eyes. Even the prosecutor looked down for a moment. Quinn, who had a strong face carved by years of seeing everything, blinked slowly and folded his hands behind his back. What was I going to do with this? A brazen act, a pattern of abuse, a mother carrying old-world values into a room full of modern arrogance, a frightened tenant with a sick child, an old woman with oxygen tanks and grocery bags, and a wealthy developer finally hearing his own life translated back into human language. I took a breath and leaned back. Judges are expected to decide, but sometimes before deciding we have to absorb. We have to allow the full weight of what is happening to settle where the ego cannot reach it. The lawyer tried one last time. "Your Honor, perhaps we could continue this matter to allow a more complete resolution package." I looked at him. "Counselor, for some people a resolution package is just a prettier word for delay." Then I said something I meant with every fiber in me. "Character is what you do when no one can ticket you, Momkins." There are sentences a judge says for the record, and sentences a judge says because maybe one person in the room still has time to become better. That was the second kind. If you believe second chances should require truth first, hit that like button. Before I tell you what I decided, I want you to understand that I was not just weighing fines. I was weighing whether the courtroom itself had been insulted in a way that demanded something more than paperwork. I recessed for 10 minutes, not because I was uncertain about the seriousness, but because I wanted to be certain the remedy matched the moment. In chambers, I stood by the window and looked out at the wet Providence Street below. People crossing with umbrellas, a bus pulling up, somebody hurrying with a paper bag over their head. Ordinary life, that is who a judge serves. Not the headlines, not the rich, not the loudest voice. Ordinary life. I thought of my own children. I thought of my parents. I thought of how many frightened people had stood before me, hoping that somewhere inside the machine of government there remained a human being. And I thought about Bellecourt's son or daughter, if he had any, someday, learning what their father had done. Shame travels through families unless someone stops it and turns it into a lesson. When I returned to the bench, the room had changed. The earlier buzz was gone. Everyone sat in the kind of stillness that tells you they know something meaningful is about to happen. I began carefully. "Mr. Bellecourt, this court has limited jurisdiction. I am not here to deliver a speech about your soul, though Lord knows it could use one. I am here to rule on municipal violations, protect the integrity of this courtroom, and make sure ordinary people are not trampled by extraordinary money." A little nervous laughter moved through the room. "First," I said, "all 11 citations are sustained. Maximum statutory fines on each. No reductions, no consolidation discount, no courtesy." Bellecourt nodded once, almost mechanically. "Second, the attempted transfer of value to a sitting judge in the context of pending matters will be referred, together with the preserved exhibit and transcript, to the appropriate state authorities for investigation." His lawyer closed his eyes. "Third, based on the evidence presented regarding discriminatory and retaliatory parking enforcement affecting nearby residents, I am directing that the complete hearing record be transmitted to the city solicitor, code enforcement, and housing authorities for immediate review of Harbor Crown operations and related shell entities." Now the room stirred. That was the administrative part. Necessary, serious. But it still was not enough for me, because law can punish, but wisdom should try to repair when it can. So I continued. "Fourth, and listen carefully, because this is the part I care about most. I am scheduling a compliance hearing in 30 days. I expect documented proof that Mr. Bellecourt's companies have reimbursed every resident on Willow Street and Grafton Lane for towing, booting, and citation-related private fees imposed during the period under review where emergency, medical, disability, or resident access circumstances were involved. If that reimbursement is not complete, every lawful sanction available to this court and every referral available to this record will continue." Bellecourt finally looked up. "You can do that? Watch me," I said. The room burst into applause before I could stop it. Quinn had to restore order, though I'll be honest with you, I didn't mind the applause as much as I normally would have, not because I enjoyed being cheered, I don't, but because the people clapping were not clapping for me. They were clapping for the idea that maybe, just maybe, they still lived in a place where a rich man could be told no. I turned to Sofia Alvarez. "Ma'am, I want your paperwork copied before you leave." Then to Teresa Mendez. "And yours too." Then to the clerk. "Any resident present today who believes they were affected by Harbor Crown enforcement practices may file supporting documents with the court officer for referral." Bellecourt looked stunned. He had come to sweep a mess into the right corner. Instead, the corner had become a window, but I wasn't done. "Mr. Bellecourt," I said, and my voice softened because mercy without truth is sentiment, but truth without mercy can become vanity. "You are not the first successful man to mistake access for entitlement. But let me ask you something. If your mother had walked into one of your buildings carrying groceries and medicine, and some company truck blocked the ramp, what price would you put on those 10 minutes? He closed his eyes briefly. "There isn't one." "That's right," I said. "There isn't one, which is why a condo means nothing to me." I could see it land. Not completely. Pride is slow to surrender. But something in him cracked. I have seen that too. The moment a person hears a truth too plain to argue with. Then he did something nobody expected. He turned around, walked to the gallery, and knelt beside Sofia Alvarez's son. Not for cameras. There were no cameras in that moment that mattered. He simply lowered himself and said, "I'm sorry." The boy looked at his mother first. Children are wise that way. They know apologies belong to the people who bear the damage, not the people who stage the moment. Sofia gave the slightest nod, and the boy whispered, "Okay." That tiny word hit Bellecourt harder than any fine I could impose. I could see it in his face. Forgiveness, even tentative forgiveness, can expose a grown man to himself in a way punishment never will. If this part of the story speaks to you, leave a comment and tell me whether you think an apology matters when it comes late. I'll tell you this. Late is not ideal, but late is better than never if it leads to change. The hearing adjourned, but the story did not end there. In the hallway, people gathered around Sofia and Teresa. Some offered tissue, some offered numbers for local legal aid. Quinn stood near the door, making sure nobody turned pain into spectacle. Elena Bellecourt left slowly, her son walking beside her, smaller now somehow, though his expensive shoes still shined. Wealth had not left him, but something else had entered. Humility, maybe, or at least the beginning of shame with nowhere left to hide. Before he left the courtroom, Bellecourt asked if he could say one more thing to me. Publicly. I allowed it. "Judge," he said, "I thought influence was how the world worked." "It is how some parts of the world work," I said. "That's why places like this have to work differently." He nodded. "I understand that now." "No," I told him. "You understand it today. Whether you understand it tomorrow is your real test." That was not a line for drama. That was the truth. One day of embarrassment is not transformation, it is only a doorway. Over the next month, I kept thinking about the case. You don't forget a morning like that, not if you care. I thought about Teresa Mendez climbing stairs with an oxygen tank. I thought about Sofia's son gasping for breath while a parking boot clicked onto a wheel. I thought about Elena Bellecourt saying, "Not this kind of more." That sentence stayed with me. There is more that enlarges a life, and there is more that shrinks it. The world is full of people who don't learn the difference until too late. The compliance hearing came faster than I expected, and on that day the courtroom was even more crowded. Word had spread the way these things do. People wanted to see whether the rich developer would send lawyers and excuses, or whether he had actually listened. He came himself. No grand entrance this time, no assistants carrying glossy folders, no silk smile, just a dark suit, a plain tie, and boxes of documents. His lawyer was there, but silent unless spoken to. That alone told me something. The first packet showed reimbursement checks issued to residents for towing, booting, citation fees, and transportation costs associated with the enforcement pattern we had discussed. The second showed revised parking protocols at the site, including protected medical access, disabled access clearance procedures, and resident grace windows. The third showed a contribution, not to me, never to me, but to a neighborhood mobility fund administered independently through the city for ramps, access, markings, and emergency loading improvements near older housing stock. I read every page, slowly, because if you rush through repentance, you are really just processing paperwork. Who designed this reimbursement structure? I asked. Bellecourt answered himself. I did, with city input. Why? He looked at Sofia Alvarez, who was present again, this time standing straighter. Because I owed more than fines. That was a good answer. Not perfect, not sufficient to erase what had happened, but good. Then came the part that truly surprised me. Bellicourt produced a letter signed by his company committing 12 units in a different development, not luxury showcase units, not publicity bait, but actual durable, affordable units to long-term mixed-income leasing under city oversight. Not as a favor to this court, not as a trade. He said that plainly before I even asked. I know this doesn't buy forgiveness, he said. I'm not offering it for that. I'm trying to remember what building is supposed to mean. I sat there looking at him, weighing sincerity the way judges do, not as mind readers, but as students of human behavior. The swagger was gone. The defensiveness was thinner. The eyes were different. Something in them had been forced open. Whether it would stay open, God only knew, but I believed he was at least facing himself honestly for the first time in a long time. I turned to Elena Bellicourt, who had come again. Ma'am, what do you think? She answered without hesitation. I think he is beginning. Beginning. What a beautiful word when used correctly. Not finished, not redeemed, not solved. Beginning. Some people think justice means ending a story cleanly. Most of the time, justice means forcing a better beginning. I addressed the room. A courtroom cannot make a person good. It can only confront them with the cost of being otherwise. Then I added another line I hope people remember. When money gets louder than conscience, even a palace starts to sound empty. Oh, you could feel that one settle. If you've stayed with me this far, my friends, subscribe, because stories like this are why I still believe public service matters. Not because every ending is perfect, but because sometimes people really do stand at the edge of themselves and choose differently. I sustained the original sanctions, confirmed the referrals, and entered the compliance materials into the record. I commended the restitution without praising the original conduct. That balance mattered. I did not want anyone leaving that courtroom thinking philanthropy erases abuse. It does not. Repair is a duty, not a coupon. Then I called Sofia Alvarez forward. I handed back copies of her documents and said, "You did the right thing coming here." And so her iltra would so and those eyes filled. I almost didn't. I know, I said. A lot of people almost don't. That's why courage deserves company. She smiled through tears. Her little boy stood beside her, breathing easy, and for a second I felt that rare joy judges sometimes get. The joy of seeing not just a ruling, but an actual human burden become lighter. I called Teresa Mendez too. She carried fresh color in her face that day. Her husband was still ill but stable. Bellicourt, to his credit, stepped forward and apologized directly to her as well. She listened, then said something marvelous. "You can't give me back the winter," she told him, "but you can do better in the spring." That woman had more wisdom in one sentence than some boardrooms hold in a decade. I laughed softly and said, "Ma'am, if you ever want this job, I'm worried." The room laughed with me and Teresa blushed. Moments like that matter. A little laughter in the middle of justice reminds people they are not trapped in machinery. They are still among human beings. After court that afternoon, Quinn and I stood near the corridor. He shook his head and said, "A condo, can you believe it?" "I can believe anything," I said. "That's the problem." He smiled. "You handled it better than I would have." "That's because you have to stand up all day. It makes a man impatient." He laughed. Then he got serious. "You think he changes?" I looked out toward the courthouse steps. I think everybody gets a few moments in life when the mirror stops flattering them. What they do after that is the whole game. Weeks became months. Court moved on, as it always does. New faces, new tickets, new tears, new excuses, new truths. But that case followed me in little ways. A handwritten note from Sofia thanking the court for hearing her like she mattered. A Christmas card from Teresa Mendez with a tiny picture of her husband bundled in a blanket, smiling weakly from a chair by the window. A city update showing improved access markings near the old block. Quiet evidence that law, when joined to conscience, can reach farther than the file that started it. Then one afternoon, maybe 6 months later, I was leaving a community event when a young man approached carrying a folded stroller in one hand and a diaper bag in the other. It took me a second to recognize him. Without the sharp suit and armor of self-importance, he looked almost ordinary. Victor Bellicourt. He seemed unsure whether to come closer. I saved him the trouble. "How are you?" He nodded toward the stroller. "Tired, blessed. My daughter was born in March." "Congratulations," I said. "That will humble you faster than any judge." He actually laughed, a real laugh, not a polished one. Then he said something I did not expect. "Every time I carry her up the front steps with groceries and all the other nonsense, I think about what my mother said in your courtroom." I smiled. "Good." He looked down. I sold the penthouse unit. The famous one? Yes. What for? He hesitated, almost embarrassed. To fund elevator retrofits in 3 older properties my company owned and ignored too long. Now listen, I am not telling you that to turn him into a saint. People are complicated, change is uneven, and some wrongs leave marks no later generosity can completely erase. But if you ask me whether I believed him in that moment, I did, because he did not say it like a man presenting a brochure. He said it like a man confessing a lesson he wished he had learned sooner. I told him, take care of that child and take care of the people who live in your buildings. They are not entries on a sheet. He nodded. I know that now. I didn't say, I'd know it next year too, I said. Then he surprised me one last time. Judge, thank you for not letting me stay the man who walked in that day. That sentence sat with me long after he left. A judge cannot save everyone. I learned that early. If you come to this work believing every courtroom story ends in redemption, you will either become naive or broken. Some people leave unchanged, some leave angry, some leave worse. But every now and then, truth lands in exactly the right place with exactly the right force, and a person shifts. Not because a judge is magical, not because the system is perfect, but because shame, properly directed, can become moral memory. I thought of my father again that night. He used to come home with dust on his clothes and pain in his back, but he never once let us believe hardship gave us permission to lose our decency. Poor is a condition, he'd say. Dishonest is a decision. I added my own version over the years. Powerful is a condition. Arrogant is a decision. Bellecour had finally learned that difference, and maybe that is why the case stayed with so many people. Not because a wealthy man offered a judge a condo. That part was shocking, yes, but shock fades. What people remembered was the larger truth underneath it. They remembered an old mother refusing to let success excuse corruption. They remembered a frightened tenant being heard. They remembered an elderly woman with groceries and oxygen. They remembered that a courtroom, at its best, is one of the few places left where a cleaner and a developer are required to stand under the same ceiling and answer the same question. What kind of person are you being? That question matters more than ever. We live in a world that's always trying to measure people by square footage, followers, titles, and leverage. But I have sat on that bench long enough to know something better. The richest moments I have ever seen did not come wrapped in money. They came when a father paid the last $10 he had because it was the honest thing to do. They came when a teenager admitted fault before I had to prove it. They came when a grandmother forgave. They came when someone with every reason to harden chose kindness instead. Let me tell you something, my friends. Justice without mercy becomes cold, and mercy without truth becomes cheap. The trick, the lifelong trick, is to hold both at once. To say, yes, you are accountable, and also, yes, you are still human. That is the balance I have spent my years trying to honor. Not always perfectly. Judges are people too. We get tired. We carry cases home in our bones. We question ourselves. But if the heart stays awake, the law can do more than punish. It can teach. This case taught me again that corruption is not always loud. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it flatters. Sometimes it arrives in cream-colored paper and calls itself gratitude. That is why vigilance matters. That is why institutions matter. And that is why character matters most when no one thinks they need to check it. So what happened next after the condo bribe shocked everyone? The answer is simpler than people expect. The courtroom did what it was supposed to do. It refused to kneel. It heard the weak. It confronted the strong. It opened a path for repair. And in the process, it reminded one proud man that no view from a luxury balcony is worth more than the ability to look at yourself honestly in the mirror. I still think about that envelope sometimes, not because I was tempted, never that, but because it represented such a sad misunderstanding of what public service is. You cannot gift a judge peace. Peace comes from sleeping at night knowing you did not sell somebody else's dignity for comfort. God bless anyone who still understands that. And if you're listening to me now, maybe from your kitchen table, maybe from your car, maybe after a long day when the world has felt a little too cynical, I want you to hear this clearly. Do not let money convince you that goodness is naive. It is not naive. It is necessary. The day ordinary people stop believing fairness is possible is the day the whole structure begins to rot. So tell me what you would have done. Would you have exploded on the spot? Would you have walked away from the rest of the case? Would you have believed the apology? Leave a comment because I really do want to know how this struck you. And if you believe stories like this still matter, share this with someone who needs a little hope that integrity has not completely left the building. As for me, I'll keep doing what I've always tried to do. I'll keep listening for the truth beneath the paperwork. I'll keep asking one more question when everybody else is ready to move on. I'll keep remembering the people who carried groceries in the rain before there were luxury lobbies and waterfront slogans. I'll keep trying to treat people the way I would want my own family treated if they stood where the frightened always stand. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. And remember this. The poorest person in the room may still be the richest in dignity, and the most powerful person in the room may still be the one in greatest need of a conscience. God bless you all. But I'll tell you this much before I go. For all the things I saw in that courtroom over the years, nothing prepared me for who walked through those doors the very next morning.